Planning Commission order will begin with the pledge to the flag. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Jess, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Tiedemann.
Here.
Mr. Varga.
Here.
Mr. Cicero.
Here.
Mr. Cook.
Here.
Mr. Perkovic.
Here.
Mr. Sidoti.
Here.
Mr. Snow.
Here. Entertain a motion for the approval of the minutes of the regular meeting of June 20th.
So moved. Second.
Jess?
Mr. Tiedemann.
Yes.
Mr. Varga.
Yes.
Mr. Cicero.
Yes.
Mr. Cook.
Yes.
Mr. Perkovic.
Yes.
Mr. Sidoti.
Yes.
Mr. Snow.
Abstain. We have two public hearings this evening. The format we follow for public hearings was allow the applicant an opportunity to tell us what they want to do at a particular location. Then those wishing to speak in favor are afforded another opportunity to speak in favor. Then those wishing to speak against or just have questions are given an opportunity to talk. So with that in mind, the first public hearing this evening is a conditional use permit to allow a recreational facility at 7657 St. Clair Avenue. Is that applicant here? Would you come forward and identify yourself for the clerk, please? And give us a little overview of what you want to do at that location.
Daniel Iacobucci, 24-hour fitness facility in that facility now.
Speak closer to the microphone.
I train various sorts of athletes as well as individuals from ages 5 to 75 in there. So I was unaware initially that I needed to get this conditional use permit. It was something that happened previously. I followed all the rules to it. Now I would like to do it so that way everything is good to go.
Okay. Anyone wishing to speak in favor? Anyone wishing to speak against? Okay, we'll close the public portion. I have a question for you. What's the 24-foot cage for? on the back?
24-foot cage. So, ironically, I run a youth wrestling program out of that cage. I myself am a mixed martial arts fighter. I currently do fight. There is no active cage fighting going on there other than training facility.
Okay.
We do utilize, though, my name is Ivelisse.
She's my general manager.
My name is Ivelisse Colon, and I'm the general manager of Upgraded Industries. So we do utilize, we sort of pride ourselves in being a fitness facility that utilizes certain types of techniques for everyday fitness. And part of that is conditioning training, which is geared very much like the mixed martial arts, where the HIIT, high intensity, is utilized. And that is a portion of what it's used for also. But in regards to it being what would be considered, for example, a fight gym, where people would fight out of Upgraded Industries, that's not something that occurs. He does fight out of a gym, but it's Gym Revolution MMA gym, which is outside of Menor. Our facility is for fitness purposes in regards to the different techniques being used, techniques such as bodybuilding techniques, conditioning techniques that do come from MMA because of the explosiveness and the high intensity, and we do classes of those sorts.
Okay. Any comments from the administration?
I'll defer to the law department.
Question for the applicant. Are you folks intending on having any matches at this location?
Absolutely not. I've contacted Ohio Athletic Commission. That's an absolute no. That would affect me as a fighter, so no, absolutely not.
You say you have classes there. What is the typical size of your classes?
Well, it depends. I have a HIIT style intensity class, like a boot camp. I get anywhere from 10 to last week I had 30, but we did that outside in the parking lot, actually. And then I have my youth wrestling program. Again, baseball has been interfering with that. I usually have anywhere from 5 to 15 children. Most classes, about 10.
How many classes do you have going at any one time?
Usually one at a time.
Are you intending on serving food at this location?
No, we used to have a meal prep company. I don't know honestly what happened to Matt. I think he fell on some hard times and he kind of just stopped doing it. He used to do prepared food, and then we had a meal. You know, I have a lot of general health clients that do meal plans, things like that through nutrition. He would prepare them off-site in a licensed kitchen. They would be basically just housed in our fridge, and then they would pick them up. But since, like I said, Matt has kind of gone by the wayside, so I honestly no.
Sure, that makes
It's been about almost 90 days that the meals have not been provided, and we have communicated to our members that the meals are not something we plan on doing going forward.
And you understand that if you do intend to serve food there, that would require an additional
Licensure,
permit.
yeah.
Yeah.
We didn't know where Matt was at on it, so I kind of just let it go.
Have you read the conditions that the building department is asking for you to perform in order to get the conditional use permit?
Yes, and we've discussed those with their landlord.
Are you willing to do all of those conditions?
Yeah.
I have no further questions. Thank you.
Commissioners, any questions for the applicant?
Just one comment, Chair.
Go right ahead.
I just think in the conditions, not that you'll do this, but just to protect what we're trying to have conditions for, if in condition 5, we could say boxing and MMA matches will not be conducted there?
No, I will get shut down by the athletic commission, so that's not even.
So you would have no problem with us requiring that?
Correct,
Right.
specifying that is one of the requirements, yeah. We're okay with it stating both boxing and or MMA.
Anyone else?
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Sidoti?
Was there an issue on the admissions tax, and I see you had a hearing, has that been resolved?
Yeah, we paid it all off. Yep.
Yeah, it has been resolved, and we do have the court document where it was actually dismissed. So unfortunately, Mr. Jacobucci initiated this business plan with a business partner that was taking care of all of the business management, and he was handling the fitness management. They have since parted ways, and that's when it came about. We do have attorneys that were involved in that, that some of the business plan had not been done accurately, and that's how we
Hence
got
why we're
into
here.
this today. So yes, the admissions information is taken care of. This is the last lingering piece, essentially, in order for us to ensure that everything that should have happened before the business was open and during the time of the business functioning is all up to date.
Mr. Miller, anything else from the law department?
I did verify through the finance department, the admission taxes have been paid. They've spoken to the tax administrator. They understand their obligation to file monthly admission taxes and assured us that in the future that they would.
Anything else?
Yeah, I got one. When you say the class comes outside sometimes, what are you doing outside?
It depends. So I don't know if you're familiar with what slam balls are, or we do suicides outside in the parking lot. I have marked in the parking lot, numbers 1 through 8, where we'll do a suicide run, or we'll do slams in the parking lot, things like that. General fitness, high intensity interval class.
Okay.
Mr. Sidoti?
Yes. One concern I have, given where you're located, sort of off the beaten path, meaning you're not up on Menor Avenue, you say it's a 24-hour facility.
Yeah.
What type of security do you have?
I have cameras in place. I've had cameras since day one, and I can view everything from my phone.
And it's a scan access, so it's, our members have a scanner on, so only a member has access for the availability, because you have to scan yourself in.
Okay. Are you operating any other facilities besides this one?
No, this is our first, hopefully in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I'd like to add that probably over 80% of my clientele is police and fire, so we're pretty good.
We offer first responder rates that are geared towards helping the first responders of the community. Mr. Jacobucci himself was a first responder for almost 20 years, so.
Okay. Anything else? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
I'll make the motion with the modification to condition 5 to add the MMA matches also.
A second.
Yes, when you're ready.
Mr. Tiedemann?
Yes.
Mr. Varga?
Yes.
Mr. Cicero?
Yes.
Mr. Cook?
Yes.
Mr. Perkovic?
Yes.
Mr. Sidoti?
Yes.
Mr. Snow?
Yes. You're all set.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate your time.
Good luck.
Number 2, conditional use permit to allow motorcycle and recreational motorsports vehicle sales and servicing at, I don't see an address, but 8613 Tyler Boulevard. How you doing?
Good, how are you?
Good. Tell us what you want to do with that location. I know you want to move down the street.
Yeah, just pretty much what I was doing at 7444 Tyler Boulevard
Okay.
at the new location.
Anyone wishing to speak in favor? Is anyone wishing to speak against? Okay, we'll close the public portion. Anything for the administration? Kathy?
My apologies, I would,
Previously occupied.
a little bit occupied. No, other than the conditions that we've noted, obviously this is an existing business within the city and relocating.
So when do you anticipate relocating?
Well, I've already started moving out of the old facility, so later on this month, we're still getting the new place ready to
Okay.
bring the thing
So I
in.
noticed
So
one of the-
probably be August 1st.
Okay, one of the conditions is you will have one vehicle, for
Yes.
one motorcycle outside.
Yes.
You understand that?
Yes.
Okay.
And that probably won't be like an everyday occurrence, just until people know that I've moved, and then that would be it.
Oh, wow.
And we'll get the proper signs on the building
So
too.
what kind of motorcycles do you sell?
Well, they're built in Korea,
Okay.
and then scooters.
Subject to tariffs? No, I'm kidding. Commissioners, any questions for the applicant?
Just one question, Mr.
Go
Chairman.
ahead, Mr. Sidoti.
You're moving because this gives you a bigger location,
It's
more
a
room?
nicer location.
Okay.
It's a proper facility too.
What happens with Reynolds Landscaping, are they still
I
occupying?
think they moved everything out of the existing space where I was going into, yes.
Okay.
Not as of this morning. There was some
Oh,
stuff.
really?
Yeah, there was some stuff there.
Well, I'm gonna have to get on them about that,
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
but thanks for telling me.
Anything else, commissioners? Anything else from the
I
administration?
have a question to the city.
Okay, Mr. Varga.
There's a plan here that shows the build-out of the site, not really his concern, but that's probably a fire lane around the outside. I noticed in the Google map that road is not continuous. The third building's not built, I understand. Is there any issue from the fire department that lane is not continuous? That their inability to turn around on a dead end like that?
They did not submit comments of concern.
I just wondered, it looked like it might be problematic for a fire truck or emergency vehicle on the two side roads that just dead end at the end.
Yeah, there is gravel in the rear, so they can.
There is gravel,
yeah.
so they
Yep.
could, if necessary,
Yep.
continue. Okay, that was my question.
Anything else, commissioners?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Sidoti.
question for the administration. I imagine you have said something already. At his current location, is there any history of building code violations, police reports, complaints?
No, not that I'm aware of, no.
Thank you.
Okay. No other additional questions, I'll entertain a motion.
Motion to approve with the 9 stipulated conditions.
Second?
Okay, Jess, when you're ready.
Mr. Tiedemann? Mr. Varga?
Yes.
Mr. Cicero?
Yes.
Mr. Cook?
Yes.
Mr. Perkovic?
Yes.
Mr. Sidoti?
Yes.
Mr. Snow?
Yes.
Thank
You're
you.
all set.
Okay.
luck.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you all. Have a good day.
Under old business, architecture review, reimaging a commercial building at 8,000 Plaza Boulevard. Is that applicant here? Okay, I'll entertain a motion to take it off the table.
Motion to remove from the table?
Second.
Jess, when you're ready.
Mr. Tiedemann?
Yes.
Mr. Varga?
Yes.
Mr. Cicero?
Yes.
Mr. Cook?
Yes.
Mr. Perkovic?
Yes.
Mr. Sidoti?
Yes.
Mr. Snow?
Yes. Go right ahead. If you identify yourself for the clerk, please.
Jack Ventimiglia with Shop One.
And John Quinn with Onyx Creative.
Okay, and what do we want to do with that location? I know it was tabled at a previous meeting.
So at the previous meeting, we came with an elevation that reflected Joanne's prototypical facade, which had a very large green background to it, which was tabled, and we're coming back by addressing the colors and being more consistent with what's happening with the center and at home, with what we feel is an elevation that flows or is more harmonious with what we want the center to become.
Okay. Commissioners, any questions for the applicant? Any comments from the administration?
No, other than the conditions we've noted.
Okay,
I have a question for the city.
go right ahead.
Basically, this is, a relatively simple presentation, the adjustments made to the wall of the building. The lettering, that's a sign, right? So that still has to get approved by the sign
Yes.
ordinance folks? Okay, thank you.
Yeah, based on the signage, we wanted to. Joanne will submit their sign on the basis of their approval of the facade element.
Okay. Any other questions? Hearing none, I'll ask for a motion to approve.
Make a motion to approve with the 3 conditions.
Second.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
just to clarify, because the initial submission was different, so if we could have this somehow labeled, the revised elevation, that's the subject of the motion for tonight. I don't have a hard copy of it,
Can we
but if
date
that
it?
could be.
We
Does it have a date?
Let's date it.
Dated July 1st or as presented at the
Okay.
July 11th meeting.
Fine. Does
Thank
that
you.
satisfy?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Tiedemann?
Yes.
Mr. Varga?
Yes.
Mr. Cicero?
Yes.
Mr. Cook?
Yes.
Mr. Perkovic?
Yes.
Mr. Sidoti?
Yes.
Mr. Snow?
Yes. You're all set.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Under new business, miscellaneous review to reduce required parking at 6316 Center Street. Is that applicant here? Oh, over here. Uh-huh. That's where the mic is. Which one of you is grandma?
I was just thinking that.
I'm the right age, but.
It's a grandpa suit.
No, it's not necessary.
I'm Joe Murata. This is my wife Sue. Azarello.
Okay, and we're here tonight to reduce the parking requirement. That's what you're here for, right?
Yes.
Okay. So why do we need to do that?
Pardon me?
Why do we need to do that?
Why do we need to reduce the parking requirements? We need to reduce the parking requirement. We're just trying to make that place active as a restaurant. And I was told that it was available for restaurant when I leased it. And then we got into all this. And that's what we're in the process of doing. And
Okay. I'm going to interrupt you for a second. Kathy,
It's
any
on
comments from the
on
administration?
drawing. You got it in your hand?
I have it in my.
Go bring it up.
Any comments from the administration?
So we've been working with this applicant, and they have spoken with the adjoining property owners for the the ability to share some existing spaces, both at the funeral home and at the adjacent shopping center.
Yes.
They have provided letters of support from those particular property owners. We have also prepared a staff Exhibit B, which shows the potential for the build-out of the site to ultimately include some more parking spaces, which would certainly serve the required spaces of the restaurant. I understand that that's not something they want to do at this time. Which is why we had made some of the recommendations we did in the staff report. But we wanted to present that as an opportunity, certainly for the property owner to maybe make those upgrades in the future.
Okay. Commissioners, questions? Mr. Varga.
I have a question to the city. The identified parking areas in both the adjacent properties that would be considered shared parking, I guess, are those required parking spaces for each of those individual businesses?
No, I don't.
Now, I'm asking the city this question.
I mean, they are required parking. The current use of the funeral home is somewhat underutilized, so they do have, at this time, excess number of spaces. Based on their own reports, they don't have a need for those spaces.
No, I'm just going by the code,
Yep.
based on the code. So you're saying the spaces at the funeral home are not required for the funeral home to meet their code requirement?
Yeah, they are required for the funeral and for the shopping center.
Well, then how can you, I mean, I understand when we have the mall and we have lots of spaces that are in excess of what's required, but if those are required, how can you share a required space?
Based on shared parking requirements or allowances within a code, if the hours of operation offset each other, it can be deemed appropriate and also oftentimes good planning to share parking from the standpoint of not creating an excessive amount of parking. And I'm just speaking in general terms of how shared parking works. But so obviously, the applicant can speak to their hours of operation, but the funeral home generally operating at night. I don't know that was your intent.
Not gonna
No.
affect us much.
It's only 10 to 7 are hours.
Anything else, Mr. Varga?
Not right now, no.
Any other commissioners? Any other questions?
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Sidoti.
This is a restaurant as opposed to a coffee shop?
It's a diner. It's gonna be an old-fashioned diner.
Fashion diner. How many seats inside?
We've got seating available for more than we can handle. There, we reduced the seating capacity inside down to 4 tables. We can actually handle several more, another 4 to 6 tables if need be. But so in order to try to comply with everything, we've been trying to just get it in at the point where we can open it and operate it, and then go from there. If we want to add something, we can bring it forth and show you what we want to do and get it approved or whatever. Just like some of the parking areas here laid out that were presented in this staff report. To me, it looks like a winner all the way around. Yeah, and with my understanding, we have a stall on that and to see how things go until we get up and running. And that's the biggest problem, is getting the place up and running first, and then it can make decisions on all the rest of this.
What is your previous experience in running a restaurant?
She's got an armful of places, and I owned, in the state of Maine, I owned a restaurant. I owned an island where all the tour boats, Cabbage Island, where all the tour boats used to come in, and I've had restaurants before in Cleveland, and so I'm well experienced in the operation of a restaurant. It's just that some of the proprietary things, like certain things about permits and stuff, that's where I learn every time I go out.
It's gonna be all homemade.
It's all homemade food and everything made on site, and everything somebody will like having around.
Fried bologna sandwiches.
Well, that's not the kingpin of the thing, but.
He's smiling over there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
But actually, that side of the road looks like it sure could use a restaurant.
Yeah, everybody's excited. They wanna come there and eat. When are you gonna open? When are you gonna open?
We've been trying.
Any other questions, commissioners?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Yeah, quite a few code requirements are implicated in this application. It's obviously a difficult situation. These folks have already invested apparently in this project. A few things. First of all, the letters from the adjacents, very nice of the adjacents to offer some parking spaces, but that does not comply with our code requirement for reciprocal use. It has to be an easement. And the reason is those letters can be revoked at any time. It's called a license to give you the legalese on it. We have some experience in facilities that were underparked, obviously on a larger scale, Red Wine and Blue being a notable example, and some commission members are probably familiar with the history of that project and the issues that it being underparked created. Again, much larger facility, but nonetheless, some of the reasons to make sure that these parking requirements are adhered to very strictly is some of those old lessons that had to be learned the hard way. So, well, again, it's great that those adjacent property owners have sort of voluntarily offered some additional parking spaces. We know from experience that the minute there's any difficulties, people not parking where they would hoped, or maybe there's too much parking taking place, that permission is revoked rather quickly. And understandably, those businesses have to be primarily concerned with their business interests. Even if those letters were a species of license that wasn't revocable for some period of time, perhaps then we could find some common ground. One of the issues that's really difficult with this, of course, is that the code requires, in terms of the Planning Commission allowing for a reduction in the parking, that it be an evidence-based approach. Now, our parking standards are evidence-based. They're based on the Institute of Transportation Engineers. The code requirements at 117303 subsection B are very specific in that parking requirements for any land use may be decreased, increased, and or land banked by determination of the Planning Commission based upon evidence provided by the applicant from an acceptable industry publication. And examples include the Institute of Transportation Engineers, Urban Lands Institute, American Planning Association, or by a parking generation study prepared by a qualified professional that documents the parking requirements for the land use. So again, the lessons of the past kind of precipitated a lot of these code requirements where we want to have an evidence-based approach to any parking reductions. We know with a high degree of confidence what the range that would be required for various uses, and we know with a high degree of confidence what underparking looks like and the problems that that generates. This is looking at a 50% or better reduction from the minimums required by the code, all based on something which is readily changed, which is a limitation on the number of seats in the establishment. Clearly, there's space to add additional tables overnight. And while I understand the applicants don't intend to do that, I don't for a minute doubt their sincerity tonight. But the bottom line is, if the food's good and the business is successful and people go there to be successful, they're going to have to add tables. And we're going to run into a likely conflict between this business's operation and it being underparked, and persons perhaps with no longer with permission parking on adjacent property owners. They may even be parking across the street at city lot. That may not be bad, except to the extent they're not using designated crosswalks to cross. So the bottom line is, in terms of some of the solutions that have been offered, they're not code compliant, they're not evidence-based, which the code requires, and there's a high propensity for this to turn into a problem in the future. So what we'd be looking for is a more lasting solution which complies with the code.
May I answer that?
Sure.
First of all, the bleak outlook you've got on the thing flabbergasts me a bit. But my purpose is this. I have plans of purchasing this building next year off of the current owner. And I don't want to be in construction all the way around the building when I'm trying to negotiate the finality of that deal. And at the point when we get there, the way this is laid out by the commission here is a perfect resolution to the problem for everything we plan on doing. And quite frankly, truth of the matter is, I've got 4 parking spots from the school, from the daycare center, and we've got, I think, what do we have at the funeral home? 10? And 10 there. And what we're going to do is we're going to have our employees park in those spots, and that's it. And primarily, the customers are going to pull up into the lot. That's not going to be a major part of the operation, the side issues on the parking. I mean, that would be a silly way to go. You could, in my opinion as well. But we've got the extra space available to take our in-house people and move them off the property to make room for people to come in. And then I believe we have enough, push come to shove, to make everything work.
So how do you reconcile Mr. Zeman's comments with, it needs to be evidence-based? What evidence do you have that you can get by with just this parking?
Well, we only have 4 tables in there now, and even if it was increased to 6 tables, like with 2 short tables, one on each end of the center display, you would have probably need to park like 12 or 14 cars in there, and we plan on closing off one side of this and making additional parking area within the forward part that's currently done as parking, and then at a later date we can install the parking that was recommended here by the commission. And I don't have a problem with that.
Would you be willing to land bank that property?
Pardon me?
Would you be willing to land bank that parking?
How so?
Well, if at such time that you need that parking space, then you've got to make that improvement.
And to land bank it, how do you go about doing that?
If you want to.
Well, you would have to, I guess, accept the exhibit that's been presented and show it that we would identify these on the plan as land bank spaces, and if the commission administration deemed it necessary for you to then provide those spaces, you would have to install those spaces.
Fine. See, that's fine with me. But the thing that I'm concerned about is I don't want to get into trying to do all of this construction immediately, because if I did that, then it puts Mario in a heck of a spot, because then he's got to get up and start going nose to nose with me on everything that goes on if he doesn't want to do it exactly.
So is that a yes?
Yes.
You'd be willing to land bank the property?
Yes.
Well, my name's Mike Meyer. I'm an architect for the project. It's just
is it, not to throw water on this, but as the tenant, can he do that, or does it have to be the property owner?
These are things that should be negotiated ordinarily in the lease.
Right.
And I'm not privy to the lease. They don't have to provide a copy of the lease. But generally, when you're looking at a commercial property, zoning review is one of your due diligence items. And to the extent that the facility in some way is deficient for the potential use, that's the subject of the lease. The two parties would negotiate something. Whether the build-out would be something that would be the tenant's responsibility or the landlord's responsibility, whether improvements such as increasing the amount of parking would be tenant or landlord responsibility. Those are all negotiating points between the property owner and the tenant. If that wasn't done in this case, obviously that's a pretty material omission, and I still think there's an opportunity for the property owner and the tenant to work that out. Still think there's an opportunity with the adjacent property owners to come up with an agreement which is more solid and not something which is revocable at will, so that we can have a high level of assurance that those additional parking spaces will be available on the adjacent parcels.
Well, I'm sorry.
Go right ahead.
What I was going to say is, it's to our benefit to go along with what you're saying there. The only thing is, we need a chance to get the thing started and get it going before we go ahead and do that. Because I have a thing set up with the owner. At any time, we've got to get down to head-to-head and finish laying out the bottom line on the purchase of the property from him. And I don't want to be in the middle of construction and purchasing his building.
Understand.
I don't mind doing any improvements to what's there already. But like, for example, if I was doing this, when I got to the point where I was putting in these other parking spots in there, all of that blacktop that's up in that other area would be long gone before it even started thinking about that. Because I think that should all be replaced, because it's just barely usable now. And it's been sitting for a long time, and it's been there forever. And fix a couple of the other problems. So I'm typically not the kind of tenant that wants to go in there and browbeat everybody to death with minute little differences here. What I'm looking to do is just get this business under operation, in place, and transfer the ownership, and then I can go in there and do these things. Then I would have absolutely no problem at all agreeing with what's on this paper. I agree with what's on this paper.
Right ahead.
What percentage of your business is carry out?
Probably 40%, 45%. And the rest of it, we anticipate a reasonable activity from the school district, because we're going to have a full-blown pizza shop in there too. On a production system, a small machine, but the thing cranks it out. And so we'll have a lot of walk-in and walk-out. But I need some seating capacity for the people that live in the area, like the subdivision right down the street from the shop on the other side of the funeral home. There's what's the condominium name? I forget the name of the complex, but you got a lot of retirees in there and a lot of folks that could use what we have to offer there with the full-blown dinners. So what I plan on doing to comply with everything here is just cut back on the menu so that we can handle mostly the walk-in, walk-out, and the fast stuff, and do a reasonable amount of sit-down dinners. And then as we can make these changes, then we'd be more than happy to go back and put the dinners in full force,
Okay.
if that can suit everybody's agenda.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Sidoti?
You mentioned about parking the employees on those additional
Of course.
shared spots. How many employees are you projecting for this business?
Probably about six plus the two of us, 8.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And we're open from 10 to 7. And that'll be 7 days a week.
Okay, any other questions? So you agree to the land bank?
Yes.
For parking?
Yes.
Okay.
All we need is a little bit of time to get things rolling.
How much time? How much time?
hopefully within a year so that I can close the deal on this thing. I want to get title to this property. And once I've got that, then I'd be ready to go at it. That's the first thing I would want to do is parking.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Sidoti?
to ensure that the land bank is part of the development plan as approved by the planning commission, doesn't that plan, as of tonight, would have to reflect that if we vote on it? That's what I thought.
So right now, they're showing, they're proposing 14 spaces. They would have to show 14 land bank parking spaces.
Spaces do we have here, Mike?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Prior to basically amending the development plan to allow for the land banking, if that's the commission's desire, I don't know if the property owners signed off on that.
So maybe we should.
Mr. Zeman, I have a question. Do we have two options here? Either the landlord must agree to the land banking, or if we got the other parties, the neighbors, to enter formal agreements, would that suffice until he was able to buy the property?
Yeah, we do a little bit more analysis on the shared parking arrangement. Obviously, as Ms. Mitchell indicated, you got to look at peak hours and ascertain whether or not those adjacent land uses are truly compatible to share spaces. Some of the issues that you've got, if it's going to be employee parking up against the, say, the funeral home next door, those actually look like spaces that persons going to the funeral home would probably be more likely to use. And so you do get into some conflicts. And so, one of the things that you'd want to look at in the analysis and the planning department want to take a look at is where are those parking spaces located? Are they located in a place that people are actually going to use in order to walk across, some grass or something over to an adjacent property? Will they even know that they can use those spaces? Because if people don't even know that they're available, they serve little function at that point.
Do you have a comment?
Yes, I do. And the fun part of that is this. The truth of the matter is the funeral home makes use of our parking lot every chance they can get when they're having showings because they run out of parking space. And we'd be closed most of the time when they're doing their heavy part of their business. So they still have the use of our parking lot and whatever improvements we put in along the side. And I've got a very good working relationship with those people next door at the funeral home and with the management company for the school. So between the little bit of daytime traffic that we're going to divert there from 10 to 7, it's going to be negligible to the funeral home. Funeral home's got parking all the way around that building. They've got tons of parking. They're not fighting for 2 or 3 or 5 spaces or 10 spaces like we are. And the thing is, I agree with this plan the way it's reworked, and I wish it was set up like that now. Then all we'd have to worry about is repaving everything. But it just got repainted, all the paving, and so it's good for a year or so, give or take. And that's what we're planning on.
So you could use it in the next year?
Yes.
Okay. So why don't you just stripe it?
Why don't I what?
Just stripe it.
Oh, I can stripe it. As soon as we know how we're going to break this up in here to get the extra parking in, then we'll stripe all the parking spaces so they can get in, and that would solve the problem, I think.
It's not extended all the way to the back like you're seeing here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's only this.
It's only this plan here. Okay. Thanks.
If I could add, he's made an investment already. He's purchased equipment. He's been paying rent for a while, trying to get this resolved. There is a set of drawings have been to the building department and have been approved, waiting for contingent on this approval. So I guess if there's a way to have a contingent approval tonight rather than a table or a extension, it would be to everybody's benefit, I think.
Okay. Certainly to his. Certainly to his benefit.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
Absolutely.
What's the pleasure of the commission?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Question, I think this would be for the administration or the law director, but under the condition number 2, where we talk about the parking lot reduction for the proposed restaurant would be reevaluated after 1 year, would it be better to, if we were to move forward today with this parking reduction without having all the ducks in the row,
if we reduce that from 1 year to, let's say, 6 months, at least to get them up and running, find out if it's, their 4 tables is going to be sufficient and so forth, would that be something that would work in that situation?
Yeah, the answer to that, I just have to give you a sort of a practical, real-world take on what would happen. And if you allow the parking reduction and some additional tables go in, and there's parking issues out there, and additional parking isn't installed on site, or there isn't some permanent solution relative to an easement or some type of a more permanent license, we have to end up in court, and that would mean shutting the business down. And it's not a position that the city wants to be in. Quite frankly, the courts don't like it. If it's a problem 6 months, if it's going to be a problem tomorrow, and it's going to be a problem 6 months from now, it's going to be a problem a year from now, why allow the problem? So my honest judgment in that, although I can never really guarantee what may or may not happen in court, is I think the idea that we will enforce that condition in the future will be very difficult. One, I don't know if they'll have the money to make that installation. The property owner hasn't signed off on any of this, to my knowledge. The application was specifically to allow for a reduction in the required amount of parking, not to modify the site development plan to require additional parking in 6 months or a year or something like that. So without the property owner being heard on what is basically a different request to modify the site development plan, I think we've got some gaps relative to our ability to enforce that if a decision is made tonight to move forward in that direction.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I hear the desire to not table it. I believe tabling this would be the best option to explore. To me, there's a number of options. Get some agreement from the landlord. Get an agreement to gravel the whole grass area and use that for parking as you may need it, if we're allowed.
See, the only problem.
I'm just trying to come up with ideas up here. But I think there's some options to try to get this done, short of approving to really cut the parking down in half. If we were cutting down a couple spaces, I think most of us may be comfortable with that, but this is a significant reduction, and without the landlord or knowing that you have a purchase agreement even for the building worked out that comes into play in a year, it's hard to do all.
See, not only do we have the purchase agreement, but the problem that I'm stuck with is it keeps costing me $3,500 a month. Every month this goes on, and it's gone on for a year as of this month. I think this month makes 1 year. I mean, if I could just print the money, I'd like to go on forever. That would be a great thing. That's why they don't do that. But they're going to get the same results if they just go along with what we've got here and give us time to finish negotiating the close of this deal, because the owner would be anxious to sell as well. And when he gets out, then we can go ahead and negotiate the rest of this, put it in place. I don't see putting it off in its totality benefiting anyone, or most certainly not me.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
We are working the problem here. If the restaurant were carry-out only, they would have sufficient parking. So what we could probably see to address their concerns about getting up and running is, if they were a carry-out only facility initially, they can move forward. And they would not require, I don't believe they require any parking reduction at that point, because the ratios are very different. It's once you're a sit-down restaurant, then absolutely, the calculations vary considerably. So if they want to move forward as a carry-out only facility, and see if that gets them moving, if they are going to then modify their business operation to be a sit-down table service restaurant, then they would have a parking deficiency, but that may buy them some time to find permanent solutions so that they can operate it as a sit-down restaurant.
You put me in a hell of a position with that particular proposal, because there is no way that I could take and choke up the spots that are available to use, with stand-up. I could get enough people coming in there to buy stand-up where they would, they would overwhelm the parking area right now. I mean, I don't understand what we accomplished by that. To me, that's just like a pyramid.
I think what the law director was saying is, if I may, it's a way to get you up and running.
But you get up and running on the wrong foot. If the people see you as a carryout,
We're not the ones that caused this problem.
nor I at this point.
And put the
I'm
parking-
just the one that entered into an agreement thinking there was no problem because the owner had a permit up there already, and the lease was, and everything was negotiated. And I'm the one that spent over $20,000 in the last 7 months keeping this thing going the way it is right now. And it's gonna go, it goes on and on and on.
I feel bad for you, but there's, our hands are somewhat tied in this. I thought that was a viable solution, but maybe it's not in your eyes.
How so? I mean,
Okay.
Carry out.
carry out, to me, is restrictive as hell. Because what it does is it changes the type of people you have to hire and the type of operation you start up with and the way you structure how you produce things and how you move them out. It just warps the whole premise of what we operate as. And you know that.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I propose to vote on approval with the 5 conditions.
Okay. Is there a second?
I'll second.
I think it's to your benefit to take, honestly.
For how long? I mean, how,
3 weeks.
3 weeks.
3 weeks. Next meeting's in 3 weeks.
what are we doing there, actually?
You have to get with your property owner and work out these wrinkles as far as the modification of the development plan, the showing of the land bank parcels, make sure that we're comfortable that the property owner's on board. You may even want to bring them to the meeting after your discussions, too.
See, I guess, and if I can just add, in 3 weeks, you can explore, now, to me, 3 options. You could explore what, the option you just heard. You could explore the option of getting firm agreements and doing the study with your neighbors. Or you can explore your own business plan to do takeout only until you acquire the building. And then you can do sit down. You can communicate that to your clients. They could know that, within 6 months to a year, you're going to be doing dine-in services. And, maybe that's your best option.
What happens if they turn you down? What happens, what are the ramifications of voting tonight and having the vote come out negative? What does that mean to his business?
I'm going to defer that one to the law director.
We can't issue,
Huh?
well,
If
occupancy
we turn
permits
it down
can't issue.
tonight, what happens?
Status quo, we're not able to issue occupancy permits.
You can't occupy the building, right?
So you're better off tabling it, getting them to turn it down.
Is there, just so you understand, the planning commission has to get property owners' authorization to amend, the parking lot. I mean, that is just, that's not just their preference. That, we can't just rely on an agreement with the tenant.
Motion and second.
Somebody would just go ahead and
I know.
table it to get that done.
Who was it?
And I'll meet, that gives me, this is the last meeting this month anyhow, isn't it? Correct.
Yeah.
Because we're not gonna get it done tonight. I lose nothing by taking advantage of the time set. And then, I'll get them together.
Mr. Zeman, do I have to withdraw the motion in the second?
If the motion to table is made and seconded, that takes precedence over any other pending motion.
That's what I thought.
So I'd make a motion to withdraw.
You don't need to.
I don't have to?
Just motion to table.
Just motion to table.
I'll make the motion to table.
Second.
Mr. Tiedemann?
Yes.
Mr. Varga?
Yes.
Mr. Cicero?
Yes.
Mr. Cook?
Yes.
Mr. Perkovic?
Yes.
Mr. Sidoti?
Yes.
Mr. Snow?
Yes.
Thank you, gentlemen, for your consideration and suggestions.
Miscellaneous review to extend an existing brick storage area. 2 containers, storage containers behind the building at 9600 Minter Avenue. Give us 1 second. Okay, go right ahead.
Good evening. My name is Todd Simmons with Freeland and Kaufman, civil engineering firm out of Greenville, South Carolina. We've been engaged by Lowe's Home Centers to kind of help them through the process of asking for approval of an expansion of a screen wall to kind of help with some outdoor storage at the location. With me, I have Rick Keller, Lowe's Real Estate, and Rick Bruinsma, who's the store manager. So they'll be able to answer any kind of operational questions you guys might have. I've come into this late, and I'm sure some of you will probably have a lot more background on this than I, but as I understand it, this is a similar proposal to what was before this board maybe a year or so ago. I think some internal things kind of on our end kind of kept us from moving forward, but we are back in front of this board to ask for that. It's obviously an important part of our business. It's, as retail continues to change, the one thing that that does give us an advantage over online is the ability to have things on hand and have things available when people do come to the store and have them. So the ability to have items in stock is paramount to servicing the community as well as kind of our work environments. The proposal, I think, is, I'm sure most of you are probably aware, but there is an existing screen facility kind of in the back portion of that property now. And this proposal is really just to expand on that. From our standpoint, we believe the advantage that provides is it, again, allows us to kind of operate the store in a manner that can serve the customers, but also kind of helps clean up some necessary things some people might consider unsightly, but it would allow us to kind of better manage that, better organize that, and create kind of a better overall appearance for both the store and enter. So with that, I think I'll open it up to any questions. Again, we've got both Ricks here to answer any questions you all might have as it relates to the operations side.
Any comments from the administration? If not?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I just had some clarifications relative to exactly what, on the submission, it indicates a proposed pallet storage area. So the question is that the exclusive use of this expanded screening wall? And if so, why? Why? Generally we don't allow for outsourcing. Considering pallets a species of refuse, we don't usually allow for open air storage of that type of material.
I believe, my name is Rick Keller, I'm a real estate manager with Lowe's. I believe that was left over from the drawing that was done last year. It is not intended for pallet storage. It is intended for palletized merchandise storage.
We got to interlineate on a little bit on that. What does that mean? Is that mulch? I mean,
That's mulch on a pallet. It's mulch, dirt, fertilizer on a pallet.
During the this past few months, the amount of plant material, rather mulch material that was brought in was tremendous. The entire area along that easterly edge of the garden center, really to the property line, was filled, and we did take this property operator into enforcement on that. I guess the question is this sufficient? Is having this sufficient for the seasonal uptick that the store has in the amount of mulch that's brought in the spring season?
I can't give you a definitive yes or no. All I know is we sell a lot of mulch in Mentor, Ohio. We're on a corporate level, we've gone through a lot of changes from the most senior executive team all the way down through the buying staff, the merchandising staff. There's been a lot of changes. We We overextended our deliveries in a lot of locations. This is one of them. I think it was a lesson learned this year. We're in the process of revamping our supply chain to better serve our stores, better serve our customers. And the last thing we want to see happen is we've got 130 some odd thousand square foot retail store, but don't have the product in stock that the consumer's looking for. From a Thursday afternoon until a Sunday evening, we could sell thousands of bags of mulch when we're giving away 5 bags for $10. They line up, but we have to have the product.
I understand there are logistics issues, but I think it's a logistics issue. So to the extent they need to get their product on time for a ready sale,
So Mr. Zeman asks, is that sufficient space? I guess that's the question.
It's the only space that we have available. We will do our best to make it work.
Yeah. It's.
I know.
Again,
If I say yes, it's sufficient,
And it turns out not to be.
and they're going to say you lied. So I don't want to put myself in that position.
Understand.
Well, I just think moving forward, we want to be a little bit more explicit in some of these hearings because, we don't like having to cite the store manager or whomever's in charge of the site, but we do it because we will. We will do our jobs. It would be great if, when the company is looking to add to its facility, that it does so in a way that addresses some of those seasonal variations and needs. Because it's getting worse and worse, frankly. And I think this past season there was a tremendous amount of product out there. It did sell ultimately, but it was there for a very long period of time. And ultimately, we were compelled to go into enforcement. I don't necessarily want to
Do that.
be out there. Well, the preference is that a permanent solution to a known seasonal business variable is addressed. It sounds like they haven't done that. Now, I'm not saying that the commission shouldn't approve this extension of this screening area. I'm not saying there's anything inherently bad about what they're proposing. I just think it's appropriate when these applications are before the commission that we have a public discussion and that we make a record relative to the fact that we've had enforcement issues in the past. This may aid it a little bit, but in no way, shape, or form, based on what we experienced and what we had to take into enforcement this past season, is this going to be sufficient if they continue to bring in that much material. So we'll continue to enforce the code. We may step up enforcement. We'll be out there every day making citations if we have to. And we will increase our response in terms of what we're seeking in terms of judicial sanction. So that's what we have to do in order to enforce the laws here. But I think what we also have to do is see whether or not word can get back to those corporate offices that the city of Mentor is serious about this, that its personnel are going to be in jeopardy, legally in jeopardy, if it continues to do this. And maybe that moves the needle in some corporate office tower somewhere, that this is serious and that they ought to look at a better investment in what I suspect is one of their top performing stores here.
I would tell you that the needle has been moved. I have no intentions, and Mr. Bruinsma has no intentions of being locked up. As a corporate employee, as opposed to a store-level employee, I made it well known that the needle needed to move.
I appreciate
And as far as the city continuing to enforce, absolutely. Bring it on. If we're in violation, we deserve to be cited.
Yes.
One of the items that we did mention in the analysis, it wasn't carried through in the condition because of the known creeps of the of the merchandise that occurs in this particular area of the lot. Rather than just extend that piece, in line with what's there, actually take the most northern wall and extend it even further. Then that area is not used, or is really not, and the parking spaces are not utilized there for parking. So what we're suggesting is actually maybe take that northern red line there and extend it and maybe another 20 feet. And definitely conceal that area off better.
20 feet to the west.
Correct.
To the north.
To the north.
To the north or west?
No,
North.
this way.
The northern
North is
wall,
down.
move it farther that way.
20 feet west, right? Okay,
Yes, yes.
okay, all right, just to make sure.
And again, they have to, and we could add that as a condition, they can't exceed the height of the wall. And as Mr. Zeman noted, they cannot
I think
extend
some of those
outside of that.
photos where the outside storage was, you had lawnmowers or whatever above the height of the wall, right? Am I right?
Over on the other side, over here?
No, I shouldn't see any of that, is that correct?
Right.
I shouldn't see any of that, so maybe that wall has to go a little higher, the brick wall, or you gotta reduce the size of the stacking, one of the two.
Well, I guess for the purposes, isn't the wall, I believe, is 8 feet high? Isn't it proposing?
Correct, yes.
Because the existing wall is 8 feet high?
20 feet would help.
Yeah. So I guess that's the question, is the 8 feet high sufficient, but then also extending it out further? Because obviously our goal here is
I'm talking about adjacent to the building, this wall, where that stuff is stacked above the height of the wall. I shouldn't see any of that, am I right?
I believe that product is above the,
Well, it's not above the fence, but it's certainly above, I can certainly see it.
or you can see it through the fence.
That's what I'm talking about.
well, I guess by nature of the construction of it, you can see everything.
It's been like that since the store was built.
Yeah, I think that was
Well,
fine.
I'm not sure that should have been like that since the store was built.
Well, we've certainly modified some of these requirements over time, but I think the point's well taken. It was approved, and it has functioned, and I think they've actually operated within. I don't know if they've ever had materials above the height of that those pillars or the fence line, but. I think that is conforming based on the original approval that was made, but it was not something that would be conforming if this were a brand-new project that were being proposed.
Mr. Chairman, I'm trying to figure out, I'm looking at the plan, I'm trying to see what's in this plan that we're looking at and what's not. The back area already has a wall around it. Now we're going to put this front area with the wall around it. What's the status of all the parking spaces that are being overbuilt here, including the driveway, which looks to me like a maneuvering space between the storage area and the outdoors, the new storage area and the existing storage area? There's parking spaces shown all over the place. What's the status of those parking spaces?
Well, so they're not being used. Under the parking analysis in the staff report, there's 521 spaces with 72 land banked on the rear of the building.
Back, I see those.
And those aren't being utilized well.
But these aren't land banked, they're just not being.
They're not being used.
They're not accessible, so they're not in the count, and they still make the count. I mean,
Well,
they're
that-
not usable as parking spaces.
I mean, I
Oh, no, you're putting pallet storage over the top of them.
right, they're not being utilized, correct.
So are they in the count or are they not in the count?
They're in the count.
Okay, well, when they're not in the count, do they meet the parking requirements? And that whole driveway is an access area for service. I mean, I don't see anyone being able to park there. So when you look at all the spaces in the entire corner, in the back, along the side, and in the driveway, there's parking spaces dotted in all over. Are any of those parking spaces in the count? Because they're not usable.
Yeah, so the original parking lot configuration was based on the old parking requirements for the space.
Oh, I'm just trying,
If you
To,
lose,
to answer your question, Mr. Varga, this probably under the new code, if the store were being constructed today, that's probably excess parking. It may not even be permitted. That's just a
okay, well,
best guess.
I'm just
but
noticing it, I'm just
it
trying.
won't, I think if, to your point, is losing those spaces would cause a parking deficiency pursuant to the code. I guess obviously I'll have to defer to our planners, but I'd be shocked if it did, because we didn't have maximum requirements back when this store was built, and so we had, you know, that sort of the 100-year parking event parking, which is never ever used.
Thank you. There's another observation I'm making. There's these areas in the front called temporary event area that don't have a date on them, but they seem to have been put in this drawing.
Yeah, I noted that on the conditions as well, which is item number 7.
All right, right, so that we're not addressing that, we're not permitting that.
No.
This is not part of this proposal.
That's why
Well, based
it's-
on your condition, this is not
Correct.
something we're looking at.
This was, unfortunately, the confusion is lying in the fact that this is an old drawing, period. So the old drawing includes some old spaces that were there, that were previously proposed. They have temporary events only a couple times a year per our permit requirements, and those are the areas designated for it. But that is not part of this request, and that's why I noted it under the condition.
Well, Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
because it'll be confusing if the commission allows for the extension as depicted there. If we can maybe note for the record, you know, with the motion that the site plan which depicts 2 temporary event areas, that those references shall be stricken. And I think the other thing that could be confusing is the proposed, you know, pallet storage area. I think there was some additional term of art, palleted merchandise. I forgot what it was, gentlemen. If the record can reflect that that should be revised to palleted merchandise, whatever the phrase was, because otherwise someone may look at this, a manager or an administrator, some years from now, and it could cause a lot of confusion.
You guys agree to that, correct?
That's fine.
Okay.
Palletized merchandise storage is what I,
Point of clarification on the height, I think the existing one, 9 foot 8 inches to the top. So the proposal is just match the one that's there. So we'd be proposing.
I'm sorry, yes, that's in the report. I just wasn't finding it, yep.
Any other questions? Mr. Zeman, any additional comments?
No, I just appreciate the gentleman's comments and their feedback relative to how we're going to move forward.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I just wanted to say, I visited the site a couple times over the last week. I was kind of embarrassed at how it looked. I drove around back and through once, and then I just literally went for a walk back there. And I'm seeing old stoves in the parking lot, a storm drain covered with debris, so it's not usable really when it rains. It was a mess. So I'm hoping you guys are going to address that, maybe clean it up a little, because while I'm there, I'm seeing customers driving right past me, and so people are seeing that.
when I drove through earlier this evening, they're respotting the deck, as it were. Merchandise is sold down. They're moving stuff in the garden center. They're doing what they're supposed to be doing to consolidate. Whenever you move this stuff around, it causes a mess. And you are correct, daily housekeeping could be improved.
Just want that on the record.
So you agree to the daily housekeeping? Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Sidoti?
we've been talking about this for quite some time. I think you were before the planning commission, what, Kathy, a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago. And every year it's, as they say, it's getting worse and worse. And you do need this extension of this wall so you can hide some of this product. And I understand the position you're in. You're in the business to sell home improvement supplies and product. and you have a high demand, you had a low supply, so you need to get that product on site. I'm reluctant to give you the approval for 2 additional storage trailers in the back. Because I live right down the street, so I'm always on your property. And I went there last night, and I was flabbergasted when I got to that southeast corner back there. There are pallets all over the place. There's racks all over the place. There's piping all over the place. Junk is thrown up against those trailers. You barely can get a fire engine back there. It'll get back there, but barely. And as my colleague here said, it's a mess. It's total mess and an eyesore. And I think we're to blame too a little bit because we allowed it to carry on this long. But we got to start putting a stop to it. And we have other retailers in this city that we're trying to be consistent with, and we're trying to apply the same rules. So you got to clean up that area back there. I mean, it's just like somebody went out there and says, okay, boom, we'll get it tomorrow, don't worry about it. It's terrible.
Understood. And I agree with you. I will address the trailers that are back there. The 2 storage pods that are on the ground, those were filled with new appliances, so that we have the product on hand that we can't fit physically in the store.
Sure, but you got to be able to get to those trailers, and so you have to walk over all the pallets and cardboard
The 2
boxes.
trailers that you see in that picture, one is for recycled pallets and one is for recycled appliances. We swap those out as fast as we can.
At the moment, I don't have a pallet company, so I'm having 1-800 junk come and pick my pallets up because I have nowhere to put them. That's part of the reason for the pallet situation. So they get there when they can get there. I just had them come and pick a bunch up, and we'll go through so many pallets in the spring. That's my struggle right now. I don't have that pallet trailer at all. I'll get it cleaned up. There's some up against the building because we had to place it there. We just go through so many. I have an order to have 1-800 junk come again and pick up more pallets for me.
All right, Mr. Chairman, that comment was for the record, thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? Kathy, you had some comment you wanted?
And Mr. Sidoti, just, alluded to it. I just wanted to make sure that we recognize that this application is not only for the extension of that area, but also for 2 storage containers. So we have to make sure, that that's.
We deal with that.
Yep.
Can you add on to the building?
Wish we could.
Why
We're out of
can't
land.
Apparently taking up some of the land with the trailers.
There would be setback issues. There'd be all kinds of problems. It doesn't make economic sense for us to add on to the building. It's more feasible for us to use the trailers on a seasonal basis.
Yeah, but the seasonal basis generally becomes a long-term basis. So. Commissioner, what's the pleasure? Entertain a motion. So we have 2 components. We have the wall component and we have the trailer component.
If you wanted to add the suggestion of extending the wall, that needs to be added as a condition.
Okay.
And also modify, which I did put in a couple of the conditions, that we need an updated site plan, but I think a blanket statement that we need an updated site plan for this whole project if you decide to move
We
forward.
want to be sure that Mr. Zeman's comments are taken into consideration. So anything else?
I was just thinking about making a condition that had, about maintenance, that this approval is based on, I'm trying to think of the way of measuring it, but an acceptable level of maintenance in this entire area, behind the building, next to the building. We were just looking at a Google map, or Google, looking down the serviceway in the back. It's a mess. I mean, that's, I don't, can we make a condition, Ms. Seaman, can we make a condition that it meets a much higher level of maintenance?
Well,
I know how you measure that.
yeah, well, we do obviously have a property maintenance code. We have enforced this property pursuant to that code. So I don't know that trying to create a condition which is as particularized as our property maintenance code. But obviously, this refuse or whatever, pallets, whatever term you want to put on it, it's become something that's not permitted.
So how do you deal with it? You're the one that's got to deal with it. How do you deal with it?
But the code,
Piece or the,
Maintenance piece.
I'll have it cleaned up by Monday. Have it acceptable,
So how do we maintain that as long-term investment?
gotta keep on top of it, have a team out there every week and make sure it gets cleaned up. Pallet piece I'm working on, I need a trailer, so I'm having 1-800 Junk come and pick that up. So it'll have to come sooner and more often to do that.
So he said weekly basis. So it's gotta
You
be
know,
cleaned up.
obviously, this is on the enforcement radar screen, and so I think we've made that point fairly clear, both tonight and obviously through citations that have been recently issued. So my anticipation is that code enforcement officers will be having routine, checks on this property moving forward.
What's the pleasure of the commission?
So I'll make the motion, but I'm trying to figure out how many conditions we know.
There would be 8 with the extension of the wall.
And then the updated site plan would be 9.
It's 9.
So it's 9 conditions.
And a 10th one, scrapping the Conex boxes.
The what?
Storage boxes.
I think we want to do that as two separate
separate?
motions.
You can certainly vote on them as two separate items, if you want to back them out as being distinct.
I think that's what we want to do.
So, as pertaining to the extension of the screening wall.
then the trailers.
And then the request to utilize trailers is storage.
Right.
And I do think the updated site plan is already condition number 5. I think it's already in there.
With the notation,
But it has the 2 additional storage containers within that same condition.
but also with the
Yeah.
corrections to the, identifying what that area actually is, what it's being used for.
Understood, yeah.
Yep. Get rid of the temporary event areas.
It
Okay.
has to be, right, strike that.
Is there a second?
So if the motion is motion for approval with the 9 conditions, adding, or no, actually it's 8 conditions with the extended wall, and modifying condition 5 to remove the 2 additional storage containers, the first sentence of that condition. Would that get us what we want? Because it does address the updated site plan.
Are you not, are you saying that you don't want the additional storage
If we're
container?
gonna address
take
that
as a
separately.
separate item.
Oh, okay.
So if I pull that off this condition here, then we can address it separately. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, that's my motion. If
Is there a
Jeff's
second?
got it.
Second? Is there a second?
Second.
Yes, when you're ready.
Mr. Tiedemann?
Yes.
Mr. Varga?
Yes.
Cicero?
Yes.
Mr. Cook?
Yes.
Mr. Perkovic?
Yes.
Mr. Sidoti?
Yes.
Mr. Snow?
Yes. Okay, now we'll deal with this 2 storage trailers. Is there a motion for those?
Well, I'll make the motion for it.
Okay.
Second.
Mr. Tiedemann?
Yes.
Mr. Varga?
No.
Mr. Cicero?
No.
Mr. Cook?
No.
Mr. Perkovic?
Yes.
Mr. Sidoti?
No.
Mr. Snow?
No.
Fails. 5 to 2.
5 to 2. Okay. So no storage trailers. We've got to find out another remedy for that.
Hey,
Okay.
how much time do we have to remove them?
Oh, Joe, just the no additional.
No additional.
No additional storage trailer, okay.
You've got 2.
Oh, okay. All right, got it.
Okay. I see the number 6 has been dutifully sitting back there, taking it all in. So preliminary subdivision to create 8 industrial lots at Mercantile Drive and Hamilton Drive.
We're here for a preliminary site plan for the industrial property located at the end of Mercantile and Hamilton Drive in the city of Mentor. This is a preliminary plan. This is the proposed layout of the road. We've reviewed the conditions and the comments. We do have one item we'd like to discuss, and that was the request for sidewalks in an industrial subdivision. Point out that those industrial streets going down to this park do not have any sidewalks. Where these sidewalks would go, it just does not make sense to put sidewalks in an industrial park.
Comment, Kath?
There was an engineering comment. It's per the subdivision regulations.
That's why it's in there. Subdivision regulations.
For an industrial park? Unfortunately, Mr. Swiger was off, so we can address this at the final.
Okay.
I think it's something we need to discuss.
Mr. Swiger?
Swiger, I'm sorry.
It's just a preliminary, maybe that there can be some further discussion as to that item with the applicant administration.
Okay.
I have a question.
Go right ahead.
I assume that we got this provided the historic development plan for this area. The lots or the subdivisions were very regular, looked like it's almost like a residential development, right? These are very, very varied sized and shaped lots. Is that you feel, I mean, obviously you feel comfortable, you made the proposal, but some of them are huge, some of them are very small. This is addressing a market, or?
What'll happen here, and what our proposal is we were asked to submit some sublots, but what's happening in industrial development today is that you basically sell to the user. Some lots, like the first lot on the north on the left, that lot is under contract to the neighbor next door to keep that. They're going to stay in Mentor. What's the name of it? North Coast Lift Truck. So that lot defines itself, and there is a large stream there that has riparian setbacks. But the rest of the lots, for instance, there's a pending 20-acre user on the right of the cul-de-sac street. What we're finding in industrial is that people will come in. It could be a 5-acre user, it could be a 10, it could be a 20. So it's not a good idea to define the lots at this time. Probably what we'll do with the plat is a block A and a block B, and then we can do hopefully an administrative lot split when someone comes in and is ready to move quickly on a site plan.
So to think about this, the only thing that's really significant to think about is the street layout.
Correct.
Because that's, everything else probably, you know, the arrangement of these lots, the sizes, the orientation, that's probably going to change as things move on. But you would
correct.
be tied into this street orientation.
That is, at this time, what the street is, I think, there's a final plan. I note that the cul-de-sac meets the 600-foot regulation. I believe the cul-de-sac meets the fire department requirements. We work with the administration and engineering on how to lay out the streets so there's not, especially in industrial parks, so the curves are conducive to truck traffic.
So the temporary cul-de-sacs will go away?
Yes, sir.
Okay,
That's part of the code.
right. Just wanted to be sure. Okay. Any other questions? Anything the administration would like to add?
No, I think the majority of the comments, were per engineering, which obviously have to be worked through yet. And so, obviously just our preliminary review, we're okay with it as proposed.
Just one other observation, I guess. So it's in a kind of a floodplain situation?
There is some floodplain on the north property line along the northern railroad tracks.
And there was a discussion about creating, eventually the building pads would be above whatever the elevation was.
That is correct.
That's a reasonable, that's reasonable to anticipate that you'll be able to do that with this property, to raise those building pads?
Sir, there is some study being done right now to ascertain that the floodplain is accurate. A lot of times that's done in a computer in Washington, D.C. or something. So we've hired an expert. We're working with Mr. Decker, and then we will be submitting to FEMA for a little bit of change in that floodplain determination.
Okay.
I'll entertain a motion.
Motion with one condition.
Second.
Yes.
Mr. Tiedemann?
Yes.
Mr. Varga?
Yes.
Mr. Cicero?
Yes.
Mr. Cook?
Yes.
Mr. Perkovic?
Yes.
Mr. Sidoti?
Yes.
Mr. Snow?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Zeman, you wanted to comment on Home Depot?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, Commission members. We have some confusion over an approval that was given a few months ago relative to the Home Depot. The confusion isn't whether their application had two components. They wanted to amend the site development plan to allow for outdoor storage. The two components were seasonal and then year-round. The year-round component dealt with, apparently they rent some equipment there, and they had been storing it along the southerly edge of the property on the parking area. That component was tabled. There was some further discussion. They came back. Ultimately, with conditions, the Planning Commission approved a more permanent enclosed area for that. The second component of their application dealt with outside display of merchandise in the front of their garden center. And the confusion was that there didn't seem to be any, the motion didn't seem to address those two different aspects of their request. And again, it's a situation where Home Depot had submitted one application, but the cover letter in their submissions did clearly delineate the seasonal outdoor storage in front of the garden center versus the more permanent outdoor storage for their rental equipment. It's not really clear from the minutes, and it's certainly not really clear from the record itself relative to the outdoor storage of garden plant material in front of the garden center. And just to inform the discussion, I'll put this up.
There you go.
There you see the front of the Home Depot, that area being in front of their garden center. Part of their garden center's interior, and so they seem to have taken an interpretation that the full interior space is suitable for the display of plant material. I'm not really sure that the Commission acted on this in this aspect of the request, but it's not clear that it didn't either, and that's why I was hoping for some clarification. My interpretation is that this is completely prohibited by the code. In other words, the Commission does not have the jurisdiction or authority to approve outdoor displays of this nature. I think some of the confusion, and just to go back a little bit, when we're talking about the code is 116104, special provisions applicable to industrial and commercial districts. Now, it gets under subsection A, there's two sentences that are material to these discussions. The first sentence starts with, within the front building setback and side building setbacks adjacent to rights of way, there shall be no storage or display of any materials, equipment, inventory, merchandise, wares, or vending machines. That, in my judgment, is a complete prohibition against this, period. Now, the second sentence is sometimes, I think, a source of confusion, both administratively and I think with applicants as well. And it states, outside displays, storage areas, or vending machines shall not occupy public or private sidewalks, drive aisles, landscape areas, or parking areas, unless designated as an outside vending and storage and/or display area on a site development plan approved by the Planning Commission. I think where sometimes the confusion comes in is that that second sentence does not modify the first sentence. The first sentence is an absolute prohibition over where outside storage may occur. The second sentence basically is not a model of draftsmanship, frankly. It allows for Planning Commission to allow for outdoor storage, but again, not within the front building setback and not side building setbacks adjacent to any rights of way. So to the extent that code causes confusion, I certainly apologize for that. And when we wrap up discussion relative to the Home Depot and the Commission's recollection relative to its action in that regard, I do want to talk a little bit about how we want to address that moving forward. So just, Mr. Chairman, I throw it to the Commission. Is this is this something that the Commission, in its judgment, feels that it did act upon in its prior motion? And if it's not fair to answer that question tonight, certainly you're not required to answer that question. But again, it just seems as though with the number of meetings that had passed, there just doesn't seem to be any reference to this specific approval. But the motion that was made was a motion to approve and seconded.
I, for one, don't think we approved it.
Yeah, I believe it was about equipment. It was about equipment storage. It wasn't about plants and anything around the front of the building. In fact, we talked about the right side of the building is where they had initially requested, and we changed it to put it down the side of the building. So I don't remember this discussion at all.
I think when it came to the planning material, I was clear and understood that the temporary display of planning material in the parking lot from whatever month, April, March to July 15th, we certainly acted on that, but not on, I don't recall allowing planning materials to be lined up on the pedestrian right-of-way that would block the entrances for pedestrians. Just the parking lot, not this. I don't recall this.
I think it was I who actually made the suggestion to move the rental equipment from where they were proposing it to the side. I certainly didn't make any suggestion that we should do what that photograph shows.
We'll address that issue moving forward. In any event, if this is supposed to end on July 15th, we'll certainly monitor that situation, and I'd imagine the administration will be out there on July 16th. My interpretation is that it is not approved. I'll apologize, publicly to Home Depot for the confusion. I don't think that they intended to cause any confusion. I do think that the manner in which the application was submitted and processed was done in good faith by all sides, but it got a little confusing. And I think it's a good lesson that where there are requests to modify a site development plan with materially different components, those should probably be separate applications moving forward. That said, as I think the Lowe's discussion tonight, the Home Depot discussion which preceded it, and about 16 years worth of my involvement in other outdoor vending machine discussions, the Commission's does the Commission think that the time is finally ripe to actually do a very significant revision of that section that I just did? I've already started drafting it, so I hope the answer is yes. And I'd like to get that on your next agenda. And my inclination, I think, is we've got so much experience with what is required for outdoor storage of materials, outdoor storage of various types of substances, be it propane or other various chemicals that can't be stored inside. So my intention is to submit something which is very comprehensive that would address both industrial uses as well as some of the retail uses. But it needs to be a lot more definitive, I'd suggest. The best written law, thou shalt not kill. If you change that word to thou should not kill, you've got a completely different law. So we want to go with the thou shalt not. And I think in terms of utilizing sidewalk space or parking areas or landscape islands or anything, and encourage the Commission to assist with drafting some code language for recommendation to Council, which is very concrete and definitive. But I think it can also be responsive to the business's needs, both industrial as well as some of our retail uses, so that it's not unduly burdensome, but still very, very consistent with what the city's expectations are for development. Now, that said, Mr. Varga.
No,
he's already ready to.
Well, no,
I was going to ask for suggestions,
Oh, okay.
and I don't even know why I'm asking.
Of course I'm going to say something. Actually, it's an observation that is along the lines of this subject, but it's a little off. It's a little different. And of course, by mentioning that the new Meijer store, the parking lot is full, and the women are already yelling at me on the TV sets saying, "No, don't touch the Meijer store." I've noticed that they have interior to the lobbies that they have cart storage rooms interior to the building that are almost full, or they're being used and the carts are in the building. But I've also noticed on the outside of the building that they're storing huge numbers of carts on either side of the entrance on the outside of the building. Numbers of carts that I don't even know why they have so many carts, because the building is being used constantly, and these carts are huge volumes of carts on both sides. So I just, I'm sure that didn't show up on the original development plan, that they were going to have these huge areas of exterior cart storage. I think it's just something to look at. I just found it as a kind of a visual annoyance, and just wondered if it was really necessary for them to have what looked like thousands of extra carts that were just parked on either side of the entrance outside and not necessarily being
Yeah,
used.
you're certainly correct. In terms of them not having anything in front of the building, where we've seen on some other retailers, and generally that's when a building is being reoccupied. There's just nowhere to put the carts. They certainly have a lot of interior space, and it's really well designed. I think it probably, those cart storage areas in the parking lot did appear on the site development plan.
I'm not talking about out in the parking lot. This is immediately adjacent to the building entrances, up on the sidewalk. The big, large areas of cart storage exterior to the building, not in the parking lot. I'm not talking about out the collection points. And I've looked at them a number of times. I couldn't figure out why they had so many and why they were outside the building.
And there's no pony wall or anything hiding
No.
them? Or?
No.
Is it preventing customers from walking on those?
No, but it just becomes these huge,
It almost looks deliberate.
Well, you know what I'm
Yeah,
talking
I know
about.
exactly what you.
Okay, so I guess what I'm saying is, take a look, see what this is, see what the necessity is. It kind of comes into this subject of putting stuff in front of a building. It's not for sales. I mean, it's not sales stuff, but I don't know why they're storing these huge hundreds of extra carts outside, right next to the entrances on the
We should
sidewalk.
look and see if that's on the development plan.
Yeah, I don't know if it's on the development plan, if it's not, and why they would even have all these extra carts.
Yeah, obviously that's something to look at. So, but
I remember at Sam's Club, we took that into consideration with the outside cart corrals.
correct. Obviously, they're sort of a necessary evil for a lot of these retailers, but in terms of their locations and appearance, sometimes they put little tent structures over them. I don't know if
No,
that's something
this
that.
is actually like in an alcove of the building,
I mean, it's covered, it's an.
and yet
alcove.
there's still inside, there's a cart storage room,
Right.
And that's,
So we'll look at it, right?
So carts are certainly something the planning commission would probably want to see specifically addressed in terms of any additional regulations. Obviously, plant material or any stuff occupying the sidewalk, that I can sort of, I know where we're going with that. Anything else, and again, the commission members, you're kind of in a situation where we've got a code that's a little, it allows property owners and tenants to make a lot of requests, and I think the planning commission is put in a difficult situation where it has to try to split the baby sometimes and figure out how to accommodate a business's particular needs and still how to abide by the purpose and intents of the code. I think if the code is more definitive, that certainly is going to be
Mr.
helpful.
Varga had an interesting comment before the meeting. You want to share that?
which one?
Why did these even come to us?
Oh, well, yeah, well, that was just an observation I made, that because the code seems to be definitive in saying that storage is not allowed of these types in front of a building, when someone presents this in a plan and it comes to us, why do we even look at this? Why wouldn't it be, as a matter of rule, just stated as no? A condition would be no storage in front of the building, and we wouldn't have to even consider the dialogue or the discussion of the conditions.
I think the ambiguity, I don't think it's that ambiguous, but I think that the apparent or arguable ambiguity between those two sentences that I read you in that code has been interpreted as at least allowing them to make that application. That's going to get cleaned up, because I think the Planning Commission has been extremely specific over the years, from everything from vending machines to plant material, that if it's a sidewalk, it's a sidewalk, and not part of your sales floor, seasonal or otherwise. I think the code can be, locked down and made much more definitive in that regard, so that, again, you can't even get the applications in front of you at that point.
And as we're talking about this, and I don't mean to just continue this on indefinitely, but I do remember, and I don't remember if it was at Lowe's or Home Depot, but one of those two had at times in front of the building, like straddling the parking and the driveway and the walkway, all kinds of flatbeds, larger carts that people were using to move product out to their cars, and then they would leave this. And at one time, the entire front of the building was covered with these, large carts, not shopping carts now, but like flatbeds and things like that. So it seems like that's also something that might want to be considered, that's not an appropriate place to store these things, because the customers weren't using them anymore. They were
I
just
see.
sitting
So this is
there.
one, it wasn't a transient use situation where someone just
Well,
passed it off to someone else.
It was just all across. It was it was 30 units, 36. I mean, it was any kind of oversight or maintenance would have cleared that out at that point. But they were just all sitting in front of the building, and on the sidewalk, blocking the sidewalks and straddling the paved area. And so that's part of my observation, that not just sales materials, but some of these other, product delivery devices, carts and flatbeds and all that stuff shouldn't be just kind of end up stored in front of the building.
I think, so some of the variables relative to the retail sector, I think, are pretty well known. In terms of industrial, I don't know if that's something that you probably see too much of, but obviously there's issues there relative to, and occasionally there's a request for storage of, if it's a, if it's a building contractor, I think.
We had one out in, I forget where it was, Hamilton or Progress, one of those streets. It was I think a roofer that said, I need to put my equipment outside. We said, you can't do that. You gotta shield it from view. So it does happen in the industrial area.
So just to give me a little direction, probably some similar treatment relative to front building line setback and side building line setbacks. In other words, my assumption is you want to make sure that to the extent something has to be stored outside, it's beyond the rear wall of the principal building. So, and anything else to, and I know I'm probably catching you off guard tonight with this whole discussion, but you've seen so much of it, I figured.
Well, I guess some of this has to be considered when these projects are initially presented too. That the initial reviews, the initial site plans incorporate these values clearly up front, so that they don't slowly end up weeping back into the front. That it's conditional to the entire project being approved.
Well, I think we understand what motivates them. They don't want a 12-month improvement for their 3-month seasonal inventory. I mean, I get it. I get why they're trying to cut that corner. But again, that to me is a logistics issue that some of these companies are, we're not talking about mom and pop operators. We're talking about large corporations.
Found in the past is a lot of times you have a transient store manager situation where he's in for 6 months, the new guy comes in, doesn't know what's going on.
Certainly. We have, former planning administrator used to go out when there's a new store manager. He referred to it as an orientation session, so he can explain it to him. And that's what happened. Very often they were transferred in from areas with basically no discernible regulations. And I think all of us internally can come up with an example of one of these large home improvement stores in some other community where the parking lot is retail, is part of the retail sales floor, essentially. It's an incredible amount of materials that they keep out there permanently. So, but yeah, it is an educational component, but you'd think at some point there'd be some notation somewhere in a file that if you're coming to work in Mentor, you better talk to the planning department about what you can and can't do.
We would hope. We would hope.
We would hope.
So, well, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Planning Commission members.
Entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
As Brother Kirchner used to say, we'll close without...